right, well, I like clear stuff. Everybody likes stuff that's clear. Man, I think the power of a sermon's in its clarity. I don't want you ever to go home from Harvest Bible Chapel and be like, what was that about? Man, I was so lost. What was he talking about? I couldn't follow him. That's not going to happen here, okay? And so let's start with this. I want to be very clear. Here's the message in one sentence, all right? We're calling this Say It in a Sentence. And you can just jot this sentence down if you want to. It's up here. For life change to happen, we must commit to full cooperation with God's desire to transform us. All right? There it is. It's up on the screen. Let's read this together. Everyone on all of our campuses, lift up your voice. Let's say it together. For life. Now, there's some big words in that sentence. We must, and commit, and full cooperation. That's a big sentence. And now some of you are such humble, gracious, teachable people. I'm a little more the skeptic, so when I'm preparing a message, I think about anybody here kind of listen a little more critically? Put up your hand if you listen kind of critically. I think about you all the time when I'm preparing a sermon because I'm kind of like you. And so if I was hearing this message, I'd be like, commit, must, full. I put my whole life in God's hands. I give him everything. Just let him. He's going to start driving the car now. Where are we going? That's the way I think. So I want to start with a sentence now that I think will be fairly self-evident for some people, but I just don't want to assume it because the goal of this message is to get everyone on board. The title of this message is Sign Me Up. I don't want to go forward in this awesome life-transforming series from now through Thanksgiving. I don't want to do this every week without taking one whole week to make sure we're all in this together. And so, start with this. God, understatement, God has a great resume on change. Do you get it? Like, if you must commit to full cooperation with God's desire to transform you, one of the things you're going to want to know is, well, is he good at this? Is he going to do a good thing with my life? All right. Now, unlike me, who I have a little wood shop down in my basement, and I try to make stuff, but I'm just going to tell the truth. That's not my best thing. I did make a little, with a friend, I made a cradle for our grandkids, and I made a rocking horse for our grandkids, and I'm trying to but I need people to kind of help me. And sometimes I'm down there trying to make stuff by myself, and generally I need to buy 2 or 3 times the amount of wood needed to make anything. Because I'll tell you, if you need some little boards, my scrap pile is large. Because sometimes I set out to make stuff, and I'm like, oh, not like that. And hold up, universals. How often does God do that? How often does God look, whoa. How often? Tell me, how often? Never. God never does that. God's resume, he has millions upon millions of satisfied customers. People who have entrusted. See, it's like let's just kind of interview God for a minute here. And if you're going to hire somebody, I've made some good hires and some bad hires. Generally, if I make a bad hire, it didn't take enough time to look at their resume. So if we're going to bring and commit to full cooperation with God's desire to transform us, let's just drop down first into the scriptures and let's talk for a minute about some of God's resume on change. I had you open your Bibles to the book of Acts because in the book of Acts, Stephen is preaching and he's talking about a guy that God changed, actually a guy from the Old Testament named Moses. And Moses was kind of a strange guy. His mom gave him away. There's a whole story there. You can read that on your own time. But he ended up getting raised by the king and the king's daughter in the palace. And so he had kind of a sense of, I'm Moses. What's up now? He was kind of like that a bit, so that when God called him and said, I want you to lead my people out of slavery in Egypt and into the promised land, he had some attitude about it. And so this is actually being reviewed in Acts chapter 7, and it says that, verse 23, when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers. Actually, we know that God put it there. It came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel, to kind of get out of the palace and see how the rest of the world lives. And seeing one of them, his Israelite Hebrew brothers, being wronged, he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down, everyone say murder. He murdered the Egyptian. He supposed that his brothers would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand, but they did not understand. Okay? So Moses, then, now that he's a murderer, all of a sudden he starts figuring out, wow, I kind of lost it there, killed that guy. He buried him in the sand. The next day, somebody said to him, aren't you the guy that murdered that guy? And he started freaking out. I'm going to get in trouble for this. And he ran away. So he was a murderer. Then he rather than facing up to what he did, he ran away from it. He really kind of gave himself a life sentence. And he spent the next 40 years in the desert. That's a whole other part of Moses' life story. And so 40 years of being pampered, quick season as a murderer, then 40 years in the desert. How old is he now? Even if you're not good with math, how old is he? He's 80 years old, okay? Then he comes back, and God's like, I choose you. And he's like, I don't talk very good. And God's like, yeah, well, I'm going to use you anyway. He said, well, get somebody else. And God's like, but I want you. And he's like, well, I don't want to do it. He's like, you're doing it. I mean, it really came down to that. So even at 80, I mean, most people who are 80 finally figured out how to be chill, right? You're not there yet. But at 80, he's still so stubborn. He's fighting with God. God finally takes hold of him and says, come on, we're doing this. And so very reluctant even then, but then God did a pretty awesome thing with them in the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea and the getting the children of Israel to the promised land. I guess Moses, you want to look at God's resume on change. I guess Moses' life is saying, look at, no matter how long you've struggled, and some of you are here as we head into this series on change and you're thinking, man, I wish I heard something like this when I was in my 20s. Man, if someone had got my attention and taken me by the shoulders, I could have did something different with my life. I could have made some better choices. I could have done some more. And now you're just standing over milk that's been spilt and plans that have gone south and a lot of regrets about what your life could have been. But Moses' life shouts, it's never too late to change. Say it, it's. All right, now let's get in rhythm. Moses' life shouts that it's. It is never too late. And for